Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. Welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Pete Welch, and I'm the moderator for this morning's show. This morning, we'd like to visit about a topic that we've been reading much more about in the newspapers lately, and that's been the issue of governmental bankruptcies and pensions. And this morning, we'd like to go into some of the reasons that those things can happen and how they would come about. Many of you from many years might remember the things called the whoops bonds. There was a major bankruptcy, and that might have been a Freudian slip for those that invested in those bonds. But it's much more topical and much more aware these days. And so this morning, we have a number of people with us to discuss this. First with us this morning is Mr. Neil Anderson, who's a retired investigator. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning.
Next, we have Ms. Connie Huber, who's the Human Resources Director here with the City of Cedar Rapids. Good morning, Connie.
Morning, Pete.
And last, we have Representative Todd Taylor, who is in the Iowa legislature. He is the new district is 70, Todd?
Yes.
And he's also a union member and a staff agent, so he's familiar with some of these provisions. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
First of all, we've heard about cities declaring bankruptcies, and we've heard about Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital of Pennsylvania, Stockton, California, and others. Have in fact the pensions been some of the issues with these problems and going bankrupt? Have you seen some of that, Connie?
Yes, definitely. I'm not as familiar with Harrisburg, but in California it's definitely an issue that has been basically too much for the cities to sustain the level of pensions that they had promised their workers.
Okay. And Todd, it's not just a city issue, it can be a state issue. Sure. We know it's a national government issue, but the states have their issues, and then they have, we also have counties. We have counties that are undergoing this. So it would apply to governmental agencies and entities, isn't that correct?
Sure. I don't want to leave the impression that pensions cause bankruptcies. Pensions certainly are a cost factor for any budget, the cities or the counties or the state, and across the country, and can be a large portion of the overall cost. A lot of times, staff-intensive departments are mostly people costs, and that's wages as well as pensions. Now, there's other factors that go into the problems on the return on investment, or if they're investing in the market and the market has a downturn, or as you mentioned, laws, the laws that we pass, and the rules that we would put in place to fund the pensions, the employee-employer split. These are things that we can look at to maybe offset some of those costs that change and fluctuate with the markets. But I don't think ultimately that pensions are the root cause of bankruptcies. It's certainly a cost factor. Yeah. We'd have to look at it.
Well, in talking about pensions, we're just talking today this one sector. Sure. Or piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. I think everybody realizes, for example, like the state of Michigan is looking at Detroit and its inner city. Yeah. And the cause there isn't pensions, it's the failure of the property and the taxes. Sure. Because the inner city has gotten so run down and nothing is there to support the infrastructure. It's something else. Sure. So this morning we're just talking about the one.
Okay. It's important to separate the headlines from the bottom line. The bottom line here in Iowa, the pensions are in good shape. IPERS, which covers city, county, and state employees, is funded at 80%. The city fire and policeman's fund is funded at 85%. Some of the cities you've been talking about have funded as low as 32%. So they have some very important problems why they have to file bankruptcy. Also, states can't file for bankruptcy. Cities can. But in Iowa, we're not there yet, that type of thing.
And would you agree that we probably don't have the same issue as Detroit with the very terrible inner city not providing its share of property taxes and other revenue?
Sure. Detroit is a clear example. It's more than just a pension. You're losing your tax base. A pension is one piece of the puzzle of a cost for the city they need to take care of. But when you don't have tax revenue, every cost is a problem.
Okay. Now, I was doing some research, Todd, and some of the ways that they talk about governmental entities and doing the corrective matters for physical problems, it's either cut spending or raise revenue. Isn't that's the tried and true?
Sure, those are typically the best mechanisms or metrics that you would look at to how you adjust to some problems. Example, in the early 1990s, we had a couple of pension systems that we ultimately merged. The largest 49 cities in Iowa, out of 950 cities, Cedar Rapids being the second largest, decided that because we had some bankruptcy problems in some of those cities at that time, let's merge. So the police and fire, also known as the 411, because that's the Iowa Code chapter it's in, pension merged in like 1992, and that was in response to some concerns of smaller cities at that time, or some of the smaller ones of the largest 49. And so we came up with a system to deal with the delivering of the services and helping the workers who are in high-risk occupations, in the police and fire in particular jobs, get a good pension, try to also help contribute to the cost for that. And we've got to remember they're taxpayers too, so they're paying taxes, but they're also contributing to it. So that was 1992. Some cities, some of the larger cities, benefited from that merger at that time, and then we need to also look at, well, recent years and of course recent days, headlines, how the pension systems are being looked at as a way to really change that equation of spend less, raise revenue. It should be a balancing act, and we try to balance both the employees' interest and the public safety interest, and particularly in police and fire. So there's several factors.
And hasn't our good governor thrown another monkey wrench in the plan by saying, and also we should have the individual that's covered maybe raise their contribution level a little?
He's suggested that, and I think that really should be on the table, but it should be part of a multitude of things that we look at, and not just say, well, let's have them do it because that's where the deficit looks like it is.
Okay, now
two-thirds of the funding source for these pension plans is from the investments and interest rates. And as you know, we had a downturn. At 2000, half the states in the country were fully funded in their pension plans. 100%, and Iowa was right there. Now it's down to 2010, one state, and the basically difference is the investment's down. They're going back up. The Dow was over 14,000 under Bill Clinton. It dropped below 7,000 when Bush was in there. It's now back to 13,000. When the investments continue to increase, then that funding source will also increase. It's not just the contributions of the employees and the employers. They're also getting money from that source.
We could also go back and talk about pension planning and assumptions made by actuaries and assumed growth rates of 8%, which nobody's seen. So rather than do that, let's not. Connie, the two big umbrellas are IPERS and the police and fire. How big are those umbrellas, and who's being covered by each?
Well, the IPERS covers all state, city, county employees who are not public safety. So it covers teachers. It's the biggest. That's
the biggest of the umbrellas.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Municipal fire and police covers public safety for, as Todd says, those 49 biggest cities. But when you say 49 cities, that goes everywhere from, say, Centerville to Des Moines. So it's a huge range in size of cities. And it's cover anybody who is under Chapter 411, as Todd said. So it's much smaller, and it's also important to know that the philosophies of the two plans are somewhat different. IPERS is designed to be in addition to Social Security. So
it's a Social Security integrated.
Right.
Is what they call.
Right. Whereas municipal fire and police is designed to stand on its own. Those employees do not pay into Social Security, and neither does the employer pay the employer's part of Social Security. So when you look at just the percentages and say, wow, the city is paying 24.65%, for every firefighter, I think that's the right number, close to that, that is a very big number and of concern. But you also have to realize we're not paying Social Security for that. So there's 7.65 that you can kind of take off the top because we're not paying Social Security for that employer. So it's important to understand that. It's also important to understand that these are what's called defined benefit plans versus most people in the private sector have a defined contribution plan. So you put in your money, the city or your employer puts in the money, and then there's a defined benefit that you're going to get at the end. That's why the rate of return is so important, because if the rate of return doesn't fit that actuarial model, now you don't have enough money to pay what you've promised to pay. Most of the models are made on 7.5 is what I typically hear. And I just looked today, Municipal Police and Fire has had a return of right at 7.5 since 1992 up to the present. So, you know, it smooths out the ups and downs of the market. It sounds crazy now to look at 7.5, but over time it has earned that.
And there's actually another thing to add to the police and fire pension, and I have the opportunity to sit on their board, so I see it from the legislative point of view also. The Social Security is different, and the 411 system is also a pension, or is a disability and workers' compensation type system. That cost is built into the employer's share, and then you might have a, you don't want a 62-year-old firefighter running up and down the ladder saving lives. So you try to front end load their benefit. Right. So that they can receive it maybe a little bit younger in age, and then they're healthier, and that serves everybody better. Right. As well as, if they have high-risk jobs and smoke inhalation or just stress, and certainly plenty of danger in the public safety, they might be on a disability system. This is incorporated into that, and so are the costs. So it's real important, as we look at comparing the different pensions, is also look at what they deliver and what you want out of them. So I think that's part of it too that should be reviewed.
Well, if you've got the private system that tends to move away more from the defined benefit and more into a defined contribution, is that maybe the future for some of the more public?
If you're trying to deliver the same benefit, the defined benefit plan is 46% cheaper. There's no real reason to go to the other plan. The difference is in the private sector, employers don't want the liability of a pension. They're more interested in trying to get their profit. So if they don't have a pension, they can just make their contribution, and if their profits are down, they can stop their contribution. If they have an official pension plan, the federal government makes them keep contributing to it. So they're changing it for different reasons. Cities and counties and states aren't trying to make a profit, and we tend to be here for a long time, so we're not worried about running out of profit. There's very few companies that last 100 years. Iowa's lasted longer than 100 years, and I hope we're there definitely from now on.
Well, the pension benefit guarantee insurance company doesn't have near the coverage even of the FDIC, so I mean, there's not a lot of backup to that. But you're saying that with the fact that governmental entity exists longer is a better guarantee?
Definitely.
Okay.
Well, also, you talked about the liability for say the employer in that case. It's also the risk. If you have a lot of employees that are maybe pensioners, and then you have a crash in the market, then all of a sudden you have a lot of, say, seniors, say older folks who are retired, and they have no security whatsoever. So you want to make sure that your pension is solid that way, and I think what a defined benefit delivers is that on the long term, better for everybody.
Okay. Now, one of the things that went on that we heard about recently was the state of Wisconsin and Governor Brown and their fight with
Walker.
the teachers, or Walker, that is.
Brown's Florida.
But there was an exemption in that policy for police and firefighters.
My understanding of the Wisconsin part was when Governor Walker of Wisconsin was going after public employees in particular, unions in particular, he didn't address the police and fire. The governor in Ohio and the legislature in Ohio did, and it passed. Ohio spent 10 minutes on it. The governor signed it. It went to the people. They did a petition drive, and overturned it about as fast as the legislature spent on it. Wisconsin's a different story. They spent weeks and weeks. Senate left. You know, the quorum issue and the big changes. The governor there didn't address the police and fire. I think it was a little bit of a divide and conquer type thing. And then so it was surprising to see, and heartwarming in my opinion, to see the police and fire folks joining in, even though they weren't directly affected by those direct public union attacks. And so there were some changes with the recall. The Senate changed hands. Governor still is there, so recall did not take him out. But those are going to be questions, ongoing questions in Wisconsin. However, the timing of that, I think, also brings us to maybe our governor deciding that he wanted to talk about that some more.
Well, in 2010, Wisconsin was the only state that was 100% funded in their state pension. So I think it's more political, as you were drawing, than as far as costs. Their pension was paid up. They were in good shape. So they were going after public employees because they think that they support Democrats, and so he's a Republican governor. I do think it was politics.
Is there any basis to say that, because firefighters and police are at risk more so in the conduct of their jobs, that maybe should be perhaps a little more sacred?
They definitely take a risk on their job every single day. They deserve to have their pension, and because of that risk, they need to be able to retire early. When the city is saying you should retire at 55 instead of 65, they're losing 10 years of a chance to earn salary. And that typically is the 10 years when people are socking away some money for their retirement. So not only they're taking their retirement early, they're losing those 10 years. So they do deserve their pension at 55, and they do deserve some different consideration because of that risk on the job.
Well, Connie, as a city worker, do you think the city workers have it any different than those that are out in the police and fire?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's...
And in any type of formula, using the figures that Neil just gave us, 55 to 65, wouldn't those generally be some pretty high income averaged years for the long term?
Typically, sure. And the state of Iowa legislature has instituted something called the DROP program for police and fire that allows, that tries to, you can help me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the purpose of the DROP program was to establish some continuity with the baby boomers all retiring at the same time and giving those folks incentive to stay on. And it is a very lucrative program, but it does incent some of those police and firefighters. Typically they're commanders and captains. They're not doing the real physical part of the job as much anymore. And they can stay in and earn some more money, but also earn money in their pension as well. So, to answer your question, is it different? Absolutely, it's different. I'd also like to say that the state of Iowa, I think Iowans being typically fairly conservative, whether we're Democrat or Republican, we're still maybe conservative with our money, has done some things that really put us in a much better position than some of the states around us. For example, in 2010, the state legislature realized that that IPERS could be in trouble. Instead of waiting until it is in trouble, made some changes that are not horribly detrimental to employees, but still help protect the viability of the fund.
So, and you call that, it was called the DROP program?
Yes.
Okay.
A direct retirement,
acronym.
I don't remember what it stands for.
And additionally, on that other piece you were talking about, the pension was, changes were designed to say, okay, the employee, you need to increase your contribution a little bit, and the state will do an in-kind similar 60-40 split for IPERS. And that the reason why we didn't make any changes in 2012 legislative session on that was because we wanted to see those 2010 changes, see if they're working. And so far they're working well, and that does include higher costs to the employee, again, because you want to keep the fund sound. So there's a calculus in there about long-term benefits. And we want to be very careful, very conservative on our projections. You don't want to over-project and over-promise and under-deliver, and you want to hit it right on the mark in the long term. And also to add that, you know, it's by design. Our various different pension systems can have an element of politics in them, but we try to take that element out. So it's not just the governor that makes a decision. It's the governor and the legislature. It's every other year we'll take a look at this. And then we have an advisory committee from the various different stakeholders, and then of course the legislature, which is the stakeholder of the taxpayer, and then we decide, should we incorporate these changes, should we make changes. Sometimes we try not to, sometimes we do it a little bit and take a look at it. And that is every other year we look at that and take input from all of the relevant like say stakeholders, and that's real important to keep the politics out of it so that you know you're going to have stability in the long term, regardless of market.
And in your experience, and you're closer to this than others, but you know that there's a diversity to the fund that is there,
sure,
so that there is no one huge basket of eggs that could get broken,
yes,
and then jeopardize the fund in the long term. Because for example, CalPERS had over 1% in a certain company's stock,
yes,
and CalPERS took a real hit when that company had a shockwave go through it. And so Iowa, IPERS, and both police and fire aren't in those categories because of that diversity. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And also we'll even look at things like, you know, if we have investments in some large multinational corporation that also does business in Iraq, maybe, or Iran, or back in the 80s, the South Africa. Sometimes we look at those, but those, if any changes in investments on that, we also want to be very careful and make sure that we're doing the right thing for the long term. But we'll, yeah, the diversity of funds, there's a nice fancy term, I can't think of it, but the managers understand all this, and I'm not a manager. It's just the diversity of the investments. Is they want to make sure it's stable in the long run.
Now, my research revealed that there was the closest we had on a default was down in Missouri on a like an industrial pipe in the northwestern part of the state. But Connie, can you tell me a little bit about one of the indicators that everybody can get? And I believe we in Cedar Rapids are the recipient of this, and that is the bond rating, what that is and what that means to the public when they read about that.
Sure. The bond rating is very important because it indicates the financial health of the government as well as the community. So when you have a very favorable bond rating, you can borrow money at a cheaper rate. So it's basically like having good credit. So if you want your credit score to be over 700 as an individual, or whatever the magic number is, as a municipality, a city, state, country, you want your bond rating to be AAA.
And there's 3 credit rating agencies for people and individuals, but in the cities and counties, I think there's 2. There's Moody's and I can't remember the other, but they're well-known financial names, and they're the ones.
Moody's is the most, I mean, that's the one that you hear even on a national level, rating the United States government.
And I think MBIA is the municipal issuance for what insures the bonds. So, Todd, isn't it always, whether it's a city or county or a state, it's always going to be a competition of needs versus revenues?
Certainly.
And so it's always going to be that, isn't it?
It really is. Those are the choices that you have to make. You know, like say in the definition of a defined benefit, that's a long-term choice that you're offering out there, and you might have a little different wage package early on or for many years because you know you have a solid pension at the end of those years of working. That's a trade-off that's made on the long run. Also, you know, the legislature tells the cities, here's what you have to do, and then sometimes we make promises like, we'll give you some money to handle that, and then in recent years we haven't come through on that. That puts extra stress on the cities. So if the legislature kind of has an idea that we'll give you some money, it's part of this long-term thing, and then we don't do it, that adds that extra stress. I know just in related topics, if the governor's talking about, you know, a commercial property tax change, that changes the income side of the cities. So when the legislature doesn't follow through on commitments to pensions, and then other changes affect their income, they say, uh-oh, we've got to take a look at all of this. That's why I think any changes really should be incorporated with everything on the table, but not make it one person's fault, or, you know, let's make the police and fire pay more.
Right.
You know, we can't really do that. But the legislature needs to say, if we promise you $5 million over 5 years to help shore up possible shortfalls in what we want you to continue to do for the thousands and thousands and thousands of employees, we need to follow through on that. And I understand when we don't, that's going to lead to problems.
Right. And really, when we're talking pensions today, we're really only talking a piece of the puzzle.
Of course.
Because then you have pensions, you have current salaries, you have current vehicles, current equipment, current training. All these things are the big picture, right?
Yes.
And, and Connie, you have to do that when you look at your employees for the city, don't you?
Right. Right, absolutely.
Okay. And Neil, we're getting down to our final 2 minutes. You got any final thoughts to add for the
Public pensions are beneficial for the employees. They know at the end of their work time they have some stream coming for revenue to be spent. It's good for the employers since they can give a competitive salary, and it's good for the community at large. Here in Linn County, we have almost 5,000 retired IPERS people that bring in $75 million in benefits. That's a lot of money circulating through Linn County. 90% of the people that receive IPERS stay in the state of Iowa.
So we should go out and get a billboard and say, IPERS is good, come to Cedar
We
Rapids.
bring you money when we retire.
Connie, any final thoughts?
Well, just kind of to tag on to that, as the city as an employer wants to be a high-quality employer. We have to be in order to bring in high-quality people. And government is a very complex business. We've got to have high-quality people, and therefore we have to be able to give them a good package and be a good employer to attract them. And pensions are part of that.
And certainly that's one of the things that we've been trying to do for the last 3 years with our flood recovery and having taken the black eye and the tragedy that we did. We're still letting people know that we're open for business and interested in them to live here and work here and even being a city employee. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
Todd?
Thank you. And really, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into the question on the table about pensions or overall budgets and concerns, bankruptcy, whatever. But any changes that we make should be free from politics as much as possible. I think that's for the better good and for the long term. And all the stakeholders should be at the table, and we make careful, thoughtful changes for the future. And I think we can talk about pensions, but we also know some of the benefits that we have from that. And that's a decent trade-off. So.
Good. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me this morning. I hope we've educated and covered this topic a little bit for everybody to look at. And you know, we didn't intend to run an advertisement for Cedar Rapids, but I think we've done a nice job. And I'd like to think we have. And on behalf of the Interreligious Council of Cedar Rapids and Linn County, I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning.